Okay, here we are. Looks like maybe everything is working here. Anybody, somebody type in a comment if you can hear me. The mic should be functioning properly. If you are here for the DEFCON 1 Manhattan project to defeat CBDCs, you are in the right place. Thank you for showing up tonight. This is a very important podcast. I think we're in a very precarious situation, and I wanted to lay out um, basically everything that I'm doing, why I'm doing it, and why I believe this is such incredibly urgent issue. Before I jump into that, I just want to go over some of the last couple of shows. So the last episode that I did with Stephen Narioff, episode, I encourage you to check it out. It actually relates to everything that we're dealing with respect to CBDCs. Stephen was targeted by the DOJ. He had information as a whistleblower about government corruption between Ethereum and the SEC, and they wanted to shut him up, and they also wanted to get information on other people in the crypto space. So basically, the DOJ, or the FBI, sent 12 agents to his house, arrested him, threw him in a van, and showed him a list of people and said, if you don't give us information for indictments and convictions, you'll never see your kids again. And on that list are many of the people that we know, including Roger Fiat, who we will talk about next, Bruce Fenton, Patrick Byrne, Naomi Rockwell. And so the importance of this episode is episode 4 is to show that in the Olympic community, we've been targeted by the DOJ since at least 2019. I know we often joke about being on lists and the Fed's going after us, but in this particular instance, Stephen has shown that that's actually the case. And in his case, the DOJ ended up dropping their case. He's now suing the federal government for $9.6 billion. But very interesting interview, and I encourage you to check that out. Prior to that, I interviewed Roger Ver about his book, Hijacking Bitcoin, which I believe also plays into everything that's going on and why we're here today. Roger's book lays out the case. And if you don't know Roger's been involved with Bitcoin since 2010, was the first business to accept Bitcoin as payment. He was the first investor in Bitcoin-related companies. He earned the name Bitcoin Jesus because he was evangelizing Bitcoin, handing out Bitcoin everywhere he went. And he left the United States in 2014, decided he had enough of the wars and the taxation and everything else. He paid his exit tax. And mysteriously, 2 weeks after he publishes a book that describes how Bitcoin had been hijacked, he gets arrested in Spain. He's in the same prison that John McAfee was in. And if you don't recall the McAfee story, McAfee was also apprehended in Spain and spent a total of 8 months fighting extradition. And finally, after he lost his last appeal, within 1 day of losing that appeal, he was found dead, and they claim it was suicide, although people have their suspicions. So I've been trying to find out what's going on with Roger. There's really only been one statement from a lawyer about this, and so I'm just concerned given that McAfee was there for 8 months and everything else. And so to that end, I'm going to be speaking at a party on Friday in Washington, D.C. There's enemies of the state D.C. Bash, and it's at the Libertarian Convention, but you don't have to be a Libertarian to show up. The party itself is free. And the point of the event is to honor people who have been targeted by the state. It's to honor Roger, Ian Freeman, Edward Snowden, Julian Assange, and Ross Ulbricht. And it's going to be a huge event, probably 700 people there, a lot of musical acts. I have a 10-minute part where I'm going to be talking specifically about Roger. And so If you're going to be in DC, I encourage you to check that out. Um, it should be a great event for raising awareness about everything that's going on. And I think both Ian and Roger are both victims of the crackdown on crypto designed to usher in CBDCs. Related to that, I've done a fundraiser. So if you want to, like $1,000 left, I think we raised close to $1,000. Just basically sponsor the table, and we have a sponsor who has put up some Bitcoin Cash. So we're gonna play the role. Everybody's gonna be Bitcoin Jesus for a day, and we're gonna try to give all of the attendees Bitcoin Cash. And I'm going to promote heavily that people get a copy of Roger's book. So you can find that at day2024.com if you are so interested. I also want to say that so I am a fellow at the Brownstone Institute, and the Brownstone Institute has one big event each year where all of the fellows and folks involved with the organization get together. At this the theme this year is the new resistance, and so the event is going to be right before the election on November the 1st and the 2nd. So I think it's going to be a phenomenal event. You're going to see a lot of speakers talking about not only COVID tyranny and lockdowns, but the censorship industrial complex. And I'm going to be talking about CBDCs. So head over to .org if you want to check that out. I also want to say I will be at WorkFest. So I'm going to DC this weekend, June, about a month or so, I think June 17th to the 23rd. I'm speaking several times, but one of the times is on June 20th, talking about CBDCs and a variety of other topics, also hijacking Bitcoin. It's going to be a great event last year. It was a great event last year, almost 3,000 people, and I expect huge events this year. So check that out as well. So with that said, there's a packed agenda for tonight, and I apologize with the. Let me see if I can shrink. There's a lot of information to go through, and I wanted to make the full case for why CBDCs are the threat that they are, and walk through what this is all about and why I'm doing it. So I'm going to walk through my background. I'm going to talk about technocracy and the global threat and what's driving CBDCs. I'm going to talk about the current global state of CBDCs. I'm going to talk about the state of the dollar, the collapsing dollar. I'm going to talk about the state of crypto. I'm also going to discuss gold and silver, and then we'll go into the specifics of this Manhattan project, and then finish it up with next steps. And again, I wanted to get the whole thing out because, by way of my background, I have been my story here is that, I started out as a serial entrepreneur, dropped out of college and started my company in 1995 and sold that company, and then got involved in venture capital for a little bit, went to the dark side and decided I didn't like that. And so wanted to get back into entrepreneurship. So I started a healthcare company in 2004. And that company was destroyed by Dodd-Frank and Obamacare and the Attorney General. And my company, unlike Library or others, my company was not targeted. My company was just collateral damage from all of this other stuff. And so, but that really kind of, radicalized me further. I think I've been a libertarian for probably 30 years, but that kind of set me on a new trajectory because my company was a successful company that was doing something that was, a positive to the companies and participants. We were rewarding people for improving their health. And so the fact that a business like that would be destroyed by these bureaucrats was something that was kind of unfathomable to me because this wasn't even a controversial business. And so my first company was actually in e-commerce. And so I have a lot of history dealing with credit card processing, dealing with vendors, and actually retailers. So that will play into, I think, some of what we're going to discuss today. And then I became a hardcore activist, got involved, moved to New Hampshire as part of the Free State Project in 2009, ran a bunch of liberty organizations like the Republican Liberty Caucus, formed a super PAC called Start 360, ran the Atlas Society for a while, and even ran for office myself. I ran for U.S. Senate. There's a long story about that, but I ran specifically to cosplay her seat, which was successful. But then what I learned after doing this for a long time is that it doesn't matter. What I learned is that there absolutely is no political solution. And I was already familiar with politics, but I was actually very involved with the Republican Party, was the chair of the RNC, and was actually in under Trump. So I've seen politics close enough. And after a lot of time at it, I realized there is absolutely no way we're going to vote our way out of this mess. It is all due to radical non-compliance and, if need be, civil disobedience. And I'll discuss kind of the specifics of this and even what I've learned about the political process related to CBDCs. I'm going to start by saying that, and I think this is important to understand, that we are actually dealing with a global threat. There truly has been an effort to push towards a one-world government for almost 100 years. And I'm going to walk through some of that because it's important to understand this. A lot of people get caught up looking at, COVID is one-off, or these are just a couple of greedy people here. And in reality, there is a longer-term goal and a longer-term strategy. It is well-financed. We can identify who the people are behind it, and we know what the end game is. And unless we actually acknowledge and understand these things, we're not going to know how to effectively counter. And I think what we're dealing with here is, at a fundamental level, a battle between centralization, determinism, fear, and manufactured scarcity. That's what UN and WEF people are trying to create, versus the alternative that I prefer, which is one based on decentralization, love, abundance. But I truly believe that those are actually the stakes involved here. I'm going to walk through quickly how I got to that. So you have, and I'm going to give these people the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to give these technocrats and the most charitable interpretation, which is that they really believe they're helping humanity, and that their viewpoint is that by combining technology and humanity, we can perfect man, and that the best way to do that is by picking the best scientists and engineers to run things for society. That's the best case scenario that we have. It certainly can get much worse than that, but that assumes positive intent. Of course, good intentions can lead to bad things. But we know that that's been tried before. So, I mean, we have Thomas Malthus, who would talk about, instead of recommending cleanliness, or we should encourage contrary habits in our towns. We should make the streets narrower, crowd more people into the houses, and court the return of the plague. The head of the patent office at one point said everything that can be invented has been invented. And we know in similar types of models in the Soviet Union, Lyshenko's scientific agricultural policies led to the death of 7 million. The Great Leap Forward in China led to the death of 30 to 45 million. And then, of course, Chernobyl's a kind of similar example. And I think that the issue with all this is, even if these people are well-intentioned, there's what you know, there's what you know you don't know, and then what you don't know you don't know. And the what you don't know part is actually the largest. It's almost an infinite size in comparison to the other two. And what these technocratic elites are doing is they're trying to say, well, we're the only ones who know anything, and what we know is all that is. And they basically restrict the ability for these other two larger segments of the pie to play themselves out. So life really is about the unknown, and it's about tapping the unknown. From my perspective, I don't know what I don't want to know what things are going to be like 5 years from now. I want to wake up in wonder and in amazement about people working together voluntarily. But to talk a little bit about this technocracy movement, I mean, the idea of this concept of technocracy, the term was coined in 1919, and there was a formal technocracy movement, which I'll show some pictures of in a minute. It was a full-on cult designed on completely reorienting society with scientists and engineers. And actually, it's based on the idea of flipping the economy from a price-based system to energy credit system. So this idea goes back to 1933. The Trilateral Commission kind of picked up on these technocratic ideas when it was formed in 1973 with Rockefeller and Brzezinski. And they took these ideas, these technocratic ideas, and this emphasis on globalization and eroding national sovereignty and so forth, and actually put together what was later adopted the next year as the UN's a new international economic order. And that actually is the basis for the Agenda 2030 that we're dealing with today, which actually started in 2015. So they are, more than halfway through their Agenda 2030 plan. But it has its roots all the way back into technocracy. Trilateral Commission now that is what we are dealing with today. Here's some pictures of what the technocracy movement looks like. I mean, it truly was a full-on cult. They would all dress the same. There was even a technocracy gray color that General Motors used to paint cars. So there was a technocracy gray GM offering that was available to people. And if you look at it, this Technocracy Inc. still exists today. It died off in the 30s, but it's made its way back. They had kind of an internal civil war. If you look at the ideas in 1933, environmental sustainability, social justice, economic stability, and that's kind of the same today. So what we're seeing and what we're experiencing with ESG and with the UN Sustainable Development Goals is a direct line. Again, these aren't even new ideas. These are ideas that are almost century old. And we're seeing the erosion of national sovereignty really pick up. And I'll talk about the organizations themselves that are involved. But this whole thing that's going on right now with the pandemic treaty, essentially what the World Health Organization is doing is they are basically looking to take away national sovereignty under using health as the idea. But they've even stated that climate change may be something that could be used to trigger a global emergency. In other words, we give up sovereignty to WHO, and then all of a sudden a climate crisis, and then move to the next stage. And this kind of blew my mind, and I apologize that these aren't as easy to see. But what I've been saying for a while, since I wrote my book, is that, the end goal for this is one world government with a digital currency by carbon credits. And sure enough, they've already built components of it. So this is a credit card that exists today. It's called the DEFCON MasterCard, and it's literally in partnership with the United Nations. You see here, this is the 13th climate activism, or whatever, the 13th Sustainable Development Goal. So this is a UN branded MasterCard. People voluntarily sign up for this, and when they've used a lot of carbon, then the card shuts off. So people are signing up for this today, and you've probably noticed, when you buy airline tickets, they tell you how much CO2 is used and give you that as a point for consideration. But I dug into this, and it turns out MasterCard has partnered with 136 companies already to track carbon. So in order to build this UN MasterCard, they obviously needed to have some way of collecting data and tracking data, using that data to stop or halt financial transactions. So here are some of the people involved in that: HSBC, Unilever, BMW, Citibank, American Airlines. And when you cross-reference this, you're going to find there's a really, really high overlap between the companies that are involved in this MasterCard carbon credit program and partners in the WEF. So it's not a conspiracy theory to say that they're trying to move towards a digital currency backed by carbon credits. It's a long-running plan that, unbeknownst to us, they're actually kind of in the later stages of putting in the implementation details. I'm not going to go into too much detail on this, but I am going to talk about some of the organizations that are behind this. You have the Club of Rome, which is an organization that has been pushing a lot of the climate hysteria for decades and a lot of the issues around scarcity and environmentalism. The Trilateral Commission has been pushing globalism and technocracy. The Council on Foreign Relations has been pushing globalism. These are behind the scenes groups. And what's interesting about it, there's a guy named Patrick Wood, and he's written about this. He's covered this for over 4 decades, this whole technocracy concept. Now, these groups don't publicize who their members are, but he's been tracking the Trilateral Commission for 40 years. And so I actually reached out to him and I said, hey, can you send me the list? So he's been keeping a database. He actually sent me the full list. And so, because people always say, well, who is the they behind it? You get into all of these different conspiracies, but it's really this the Trilateral Commission is a group of about under 500 people. It's between 400 and 500 people. Almost half of them are from industry. They're leaders in industry. People like Larry Fink from BlackRock, Jamie Dimon from Chase. They're a part of it. But it's also a percentage of people from the media, a percentage of people from politics, and a percentage of people from academia. So once you start to see who these people are, you can understand better how they're using these institutions and using academia and media to actually promote what is actually a shared vision amongst all of these groups, which is a desire to move towards one government and top-down control based on this manufactured scarcity around the environment. And the very foundations of technocracy, H.G. Wells was actually one of the people involved in the League of Nations and was a advocate for the United Nations. So he said countless people hate the New World Order and will die protesting against it. The existing order is an accidental order. Scientifically planned world control may appear to be a tyranny to begin with. At least it will replace the meddling injustices of today. Julian Huxley, who was Aldous Huxley's brother and the first scientific director of the UN, who was known to be a eugenicist, said political unification in some sort of world government would be required. And again, this was just from the beginning foundations of the UN. The people involved had that shared vision. And we fast forward to today, and we have Yuval Harari, who's kind of the pseudo-intellectual horsepower of the WEF, that whole thing. He's here basically saying, it's the end of free will. So humans are now hackable animals. The whole idea that humans have a soul or spirit or free will, what's happening inside of us, or whatever I choose, whether in the election or in the supermarket, this is my free will, that's over. So, when I said that the stakes are free will versus determinism, I mean, literally those are the stakes. The people that are pushing this, they don't believe in free will. They believe that essentially decisions should be made from the top down by these technical and scientific elites. Brzezinski stated a lot of things as well that are kind of horrifying. He said, today it's infinitely easier to kill 1 million people than to control 1 million. He also said the technocratic era involves the gradual appearance of a more controlled society. Such a society would be dominated by an elite, unrestrained by traditional values. So, none of these this has all been in plain sight. I mean, these people have written books about this. They give talks on this. You actually go to these organizations' sites. They say it correctly. And so those groups that I mentioned earlier, those four, those are kind of the behind-the-scenes groups. Then you have the front-facing groups like the UN, World Bank, International Monetary Fund, WEF, Bank for International Settlements. And again, these are not the groups that wield the power. These are really controlled by these corporate interests and these other people behind the scenes. They're just the front-facing element of this, and they use the force of law to basically push the will of those that are trying to push this other agenda. And so when you think about movement towards global government and digital currencies, these 5 organizations on the screen, they have a combined 65,000 full-time employees, and they have an annual budget of $30 billion. So I think part of the issue here is, once you dig into this and you realize, wow, because a lot of times libertarian people will be like, oh, well, everybody's too disorganized. Nobody can put anything together. But when you realize that it's large corporations pushing and utilizing these structures to their own ends, then it becomes a little bit terrifying. And it becomes really terrifying when you look at the WEF. If you look at the WEF, they have over 1,000 partner companies. Just the top 10 partner companies have a combined market cap of $9 trillion. They employ 6 million people, and they have close to $2 trillion of cash on hand. So we are dealing with a group that has an ideology that's been pushing an agenda for decades. And so the end of this is this looks like a social credit system based on the 17 sustainable development goals, where at the base of it, you have a carbon credit based system, and all of your activities in these 17 different buckets are tied to your carbon expenditures. And I'm not going to go through all the details on each of the 17. I'll actually just pick one to give you an example. And I was horrified by this. I'm very familiar, and I know probably most of you are familiar with the fact that the USDA food pyramid from 1992 probably did more to cause the obesity epidemic and type 2 diabetes epidemic than anything. And no one got punished for it, and they haven't really improved it much. But what they have next, there's a new dietary standard coming called the Lancet diet. And this is, I think, also called the Whole Earth diet. And I looked at it, and fascinating about it is it assumed to me that if you were developing dietary guidelines, that the intent is to improve human health. But if you read this, I'm seeing that the audio is choppy. Let's see what I can do with this. I don't know if is this any better? Can you hear me now? Well, okay, I'll keep going. So this Lancet diet doesn't even have optimizing human health as a goal. It actually looks at the other sustainable development goals, and it actually says, well, we're worried about the environment. So it says out of the gates, you shouldn't eat red meat. You should use insect protein instead. You should actually eat added sugar. This is part of the plan, but it's in their stated goals and objectives. So they're not even trying to optimize our human health. They actually view in this world with these 17 different goals, they're kind of optional extras. And so it's important to know that. And this is where you get into a situation where things like gas stoves get removed, because that's something that would impact your credit score, because everything again is tied back to this closed system that they've created with carbon credits. From the beginning, the UN has even said central bank digital currencies have the potential to promote financial inclusion and financial stability and to support the achievement of the sustainable development goals. So CBDCs are a big part of this UN agenda. So I wanted to go through that just because a lot of people really are not familiar with the size and scope of what's going on, how well funded these organizations are, how long these ideas have been floating around. And by the way, by stating this, it doesn't mean that I think they're going to be successful. I think there's a chance that they wipe out humanity trying to implement these goals. But nevertheless, I understand that we have a well-funded enemy that has a very specific end goal in mind, and they even have a date in mind. I mean, obviously, they're pushing for 2030, so they're not hiding any of this. And in my book, I actually, talk about all of these concepts, but most of the sources in my book are primary sources. I actually get most of my information directly from these organizations and directly from the people involved in these organizations. So it's all sitting there in plain sight. But now I want to talk about the global state of CBDCs because I've spoken with many people who, and I was unaware until about a year and a half ago about how far along CBDCs. And I'll first talk about what the risks are for CBDCs. First of all, the intention of CBDCs is not about it's not about financial inclusion. It's not about any of those other things. It's about control. So they are looking for total financial surveillance, centralized power. They are interested in removing our financial autonomy, programming our money, and all of these other things that are kind of linked to these social credits. So it's important to know that. So today there are 134 countries pursuing CBDCs, and in 2020 there were only 35 countries, and they were mostly, with the exception of China, at just the research phase. So we've gone from 35 countries basically researching CBDCs to now today, um, 11 countries have actually launched CBDCs. There are more global CBDC accounts than there are crypto accounts. And so this has absolutely taken a life of its own. There's a animation that shows you exactly what's going on by state. So when you think about what's going on with crypto and crypto adoption, which I'll get to separately, while we've been fighting within crypto, or while people fighting between precious metals and crypto, there's been a very well-funded, well-orchestrated effort to launch CBDCs globally, for large countries like China to smaller countries that have less technical sophistication like Nigeria. And so this is a real threat. I mean, China last year had 230 million CBDC users. They are actively in the process of rolling it out to the entire population. Nigeria had a failed implementation. Their CBDC still exists, but they had some issues with it. And so people will say to me, "Well, this is proof that people don't want CBDC." The reality is, no one in Nigeria wanted a CBDC to begin with. I've spoken with people in Nigeria, and what I learned is that it was basically the World Bank and the IMF that pushed CBDCs on Nigeria. They funded it. They actually brought in all of the technology, and this is just a test case. They're trying to see how they can roll it out in a population that doesn't have a great technological infrastructure and is somewhat hostile to the idea. So they're just in the kind of refinement stage of that. But just in the past few weeks, we've seen a number of announcements. We've seen Swift announce that they're planning on launching a CBDC platform in the next 12 to 24 months. And so Swift is a organization that kind of handles communication regarding payments between banks. And so the idea that they're launching a platform, well, that obviously assumes that you have CBDCs to put on the platform. So the fact that they're actually launching a platform in 12 to 24 months is somewhat alarming. And the ECB has actually gotten to the point where they've allocated, $1.2 billion for development of the digital euro. Amazon and others are involved, and they are actually putting on the afterburners as we speak. Um, I'm not going to play. This is the head of the Bank of International Settlements, which is basically the central bank to the central bankers. And I mean, he basically says flat out that this is about surveillance. This is the ultimate purpose of CBD. But in the interest of time, I'll kind of move on beyond that. So again, now countries that represent 98% of the world's GDP are pursuing CBDCs. More CBDC accounts than crypto accounts, and yet most Americans don't even know anything about CBDCs, don't know what CBDCs are. I ran for president to bring awareness to this issue, and I traveled to 20 states, and I would say that, you know, it was a more sophisticated crowd that I typically am in front of, but most people had no, if they've heard of CBDCs, they have no knowledge of where they are in development. To most people, it is a far off concept. It's something that may or may not happen in the future, but they're not aware of where we really are today. And so this is what I want to talk about. When I started to see people like Ian Freeman get targeted, I know through the Free State Project, and I saw Jeremy Kauffman have his business destroyed and targeted by the SEC. I really wanted to look into what's going on. And what we found is the U.S. has actually done 3 successful CBDC pilots, starting as far back as 2016. So Project Hamilton is a retail CBDC. That project started in 2020, actually 2019, but it had its roots even before that. And one thing that happens is I talk to a lot of libertarians, and they say, "Well, look, the government is incompetent. I mean, look at what they did with Obamacare and everything else. They can't possibly roll out a CBDC." The important thing to note is the government isn't creating the CBDC. The CBDCs, all of these projects that you're about to hear about, are funded by the most well-funded banks in the world, with the best technologists in the world. All of these projects have people from MIT involved. The Project Hamilton CBDC has had a couple of different Bitcoin core developers working on it. So this is not a government project. This is a bank project that has been going on for quite some time. Who knows? This Project Hamilton retail CBDC can do 1.8 million transactions per second. And I will get to why that's important and what that means in context in a minute. Project Cedar is a wholesale CBDC. So this is a CBDC for banks to move large volumes back and forth and for cross-border. This project involves the New York Federal Reserve and MIT, the Bank for International Settlements, and a number of large New York-based banks. Then we have the Regulated Liability Network, which is the most dystopian of them all, because we all think about, oh, well, if our social credit score drops, or if they don't like our political speech, they'll shut off our access to money. What they're doing is actually worse than that. They're actually building a platform. They're building a ledger that will track not only CBDCs, but will require you to register all of your digital assets on one platform and track digital assets in conjunction with CBDCs, where one or more parties can be involved in that oversight and censoring process. This is something that they've already been building. And when we get to what's going on in crypto, you'll see that a lot of this and a lot of the stuff that's going on is a precursor to being able to roll out this regulated liability. And they launched FedNow last year, which is an instant payment system between banks in the US participating. So historically, it might take days for checks to clear, maybe even as much as 10 days for an out-of-state check. And there are fees associated with it. Even direct deposit takes a couple of days. Wire transfers are $40. This is one of the things that made crypto so interesting. It was actually faster and cheaper than the traditional system. But with FedNow, payments are nearly instantaneous and are a fraction of a penny. So the traditional financial system has made a lot of progress that people aren't aware of. I already mentioned, this idea when people say that the government is incompetent and therefore we never get a CBDC, that's false. But there's another component to this that's often misunderstood. People say, well, look, they'll never implement a CBDC because a CBDC will compete with the banks. There's this idea that if I have a central bank digital currency, that must mean that I have an account with the central bank. So rather than having a Chase account or a Bank of America account, I'm going to have an account directly with the Federal Reserve. That is not how CBDCs have been rolled out, nor have the pilots been designed in the United States and elsewhere. It's a two-tiered system that works the same as the system that we have right now, where the Federal Reserve issues the CBDCs and then the banks continue the process that they do with loans and everything else. So it's basically what we have right now with additional surveillance and additional programmability. I've actually communicated with devs that have worked on these US CBDC pilots, and what they have told me is a couple of things. One, that Project Hamilton is still going on, resolved their technical issues, and it's now actually faster than what they had reported on in 2022, and that the idea is that they will roll out a CBDC in conjunction with regulated liability network. So that thing that I talked about, where you register all of your assets in conjunction with CBDCs, the plan is to actually roll it out at the same time. So as I've done more research on this doesn't get better. And what I found is most people are unaware of any of it. So what is this? So I already mentioned that I come to the conclusion there is no political solution at all, but I just walk through where we are. In 2022, President Biden signed Executive Order 14067 on March the 9th, and it essentially authorized a whole of government approach to the crackdown of crypto and the regulation of crypto, which we are seeing, and I believe it's why Ian and Roger are in prison right now. And he authorized the exploration of the CBDC. So this is standing government policy to pursue a CBDC, the regulation of digital assets. In my process of traveling around the country, I went to 20 different states. I talked to a number of the other presidential candidates. I talked to read my book. We had multiple conversations about it, and actually, I'm New Hampshire, and so I think in some way my pushing on him on this issue pushed him to push Trump when Trump was a contested primary. So Trump has come out against CBDCs, although do I believe it? Am I counting on it? Absolutely not. But nevertheless, that's a little bit of the story behind that. And from a political perspective, I mean, let's just be honest. In 2022, 100% of U.S. Senate incumbents won re-election. 100%, 94.5% of representatives won re-election. And so there's change isn't even on the menu. We've got the same people at the top of the ticket that we've had throughout all of COVID, and Congress is going to be the same. So there really isn't much of a prospect for change at the political level. I spoke with Ted Cruz, and Ted Cruz twice has put in a bill. And his bill is a very simple bill. His bill basically says the Federal Reserve can't act unilaterally on the CBDC without Congress. And it didn't even come up for a vote last year. It may come up for a vote this year, but I mean, this is kind of a useless bill anyway. You technically don't even need that bill because Congress is required to issue and create currency anyway. So this is kind of a throwaway. But the scarier part is that Elizabeth Warren is very much kind of being the anti-crypto charge. She's very vocal in favor of CBDCs and for the complete shutdown of crypto. And she hasn't been successful at passing any of her really draconian stuff. But as Ted Cruz told me, Ted Cruz is actually in a contested race. But he actually said that Elizabeth Warren might very well become the next chair of the finance committee. So she might actually be one kind of driving this ship in the next election cycle. And so she said things, a well-designed CBDC could serve as a public alternative to cryptocurrencies and potentially crowd out their usage. So again, the President of the United States has an executive order authorizing the exploration of this, and you have people that are pushing for this in Congress today and not even in an emergency situation. Because then the question becomes, well, how are we going to get CBDCs? Well, we're going to get CBDCs the same way we got the Patriot Act, TARP, and the CARES Act, which uses a very simple, proven formula, problem, reaction, solution. You either create an emergency or take advantage of an emergency that happens to occur. People become fearful, and then you implement the policy or the big change that you want to have made when people are in this fearful state. So we got the Patriot Act 45 days after 9/11. TARP was passed 18 days after Lehman Brothers collapsed, and the CARES Act was passed 16 days after COVID was declared a pandemic on a voice vote. And it's important to note there are people in Congress that vote for all three of those things that are still elected and still hold office. So if you look at what's going on in the world, on any day there is something that could actually trigger an emergency that could be used to usher into CBDC, whether it's a cyber attack, whether it's whatever's going on in the Middle East, a financial collapse, and it would ultimately get bipartisan support. I don't believe that there would be any resistance in an emergency, and they will use terrorism and they will use money laundering as the justification for why they have to implement it. So, I mean, the summary of this is that the technology's already been developed for CBDC. It's already government policy, and in essence, they're just waiting for an emergency. And we know that in a broader sense, there's more of this movement towards the erosion of sovereignty. Why Biden is behind the pandemic treaty and vaccine passports and everything else. I mean, this is something that's been kind of going on behind the scenes for quite some time. I'm going to go quickly through this, but to say that so CBDCs are real. They're a real threat. The tech is there. The intent is there. And more importantly, I've had a lot of people say to me, well, yeah, but how bad really are CBDCs? Because the dollar is already pretty bad as it is. And that's true. The dollar is, you shouldn't be in fiat. People should be exiting the dollar right now. And I will go through kind of the analysis of that. I think the dollar is on death watch. This is a quote from Voltaire: paper money eventually returns to its intrinsic value, zero. And the interesting thing is there's been quite an analysis of fiat. This guy analyzed 750 different fiat government-backed currencies, and he found that they all fail, 100% failure rate. The average fiat currency lasts 27 years. And there are 7 main reasons that a fiat collapses: excess debt, as in Greece in 2010, economic mismanagement, which happened in Zimbabwe in the late 2000s, political instability in Venezuela, currency competition, so that's what the euro was for countries countries in Europe. You have hyperinflation, as in Weimar Republic, Germany, loss of confidence, which is an ongoing in and out situation in Argentina, and then war and conflict, which destroyed the Yugoslav dinar. So these are the main reasons historically fiat currencies collapse. The dollar is flashing out on all of them. So excessive debt. Yeah, we have almost $35 trillion. Economic mismanagement. The Treasury can't account for $21 trillion, and the Pentagon has failed an audit 6 years in a row. Political instability. I mean, obviously, this has been happening and brewing, and it's something that we're dealing with certainly in large cities, uh, and is an escalating situation, and it's getting worse by the day. I mean, it's even starting to impact New Hampshire just based on the sheer volume. Hyperinflation. Certainly know that we're seeing that regardless of what they report is the inflation numbers. It's at least twice that. And at the end of the day, the dollar has lost 98, almost 99% of its value since 1913. Loss of confidence. So for the average confidence in the U.S. is at an all-time low for all institutions, not just government. There's a general, whether it's media, whether it's sports, whether it's politics, overall, even religious organizations. Average confidence is at a low number. And almost half of Americans are worried about the safety of their money in the banks, which they should be. Then there's competition. We have the BRICS nations coming on with a vengeance. And at the rate the BRICS nations are going, will have greater share of the GDP in the West by originally 2035. Now maybe it's 2030. And crypto is a competition. It's competition for fiat currency. And then war, of course, we're nearing $1 trillion in military spending, and it seems to go on and on. And certainly overextension of military is a major reason for collapse historically. And so you might say, well, the U.S. is a global reserve currency. And even if you look at the 5 previous global currencies, they only lasted, I think, 94 years, something like that on average. So the dollar's been the global reserve currency for over 100 years. So there's really not even an argument that we have some protected situation because we're a global reserve currency. And we abandoned the gold standard. So FDR changed the price and deflated the dollar, and then Nixon abandoned the gold standard in '71. And then we've had this fractional reserve system where banks are required to have 10% of customer deposits on reserves. And that was waived under COVID legislation in 2020. So your bank is no longer required to hold any reserves. So then when you go to take your money out of the bank, how do you know the bank is going to have the money to pay you? Well, the bank is counting principal and interest payments being made on commercial real estate, residential real estate, credit card debt, student loans, and auto loans. And many of these are starting to are near 2008 crisis level. Commercial real estate is probably the next big thing to drop. I was just out in Silicon Valley a couple of weeks ago. It was amazing. I had an office out there like 25 years ago, and it was almost impossible to find office space. And now, you're seeing completely empty buildings and completely empty parking lots. And so this is a big source of revenue for these banks. And then I did something. I did an analysis of the contracts of the 4 largest banks, JP Morgan, Bank of America, Citi, and nobody ever reads the contract. We've been conditioned to just agree and consent to these click without reading. We do this with software licenses and everything else. Well, when you actually dig into your bank account service, here's what it says. The bank can cancel your account without reason. They can change the fees at their discretion. They can sell and give away your data without your consent. And the banks are now actually partnering with the IRS and using AI to analyze transactions. And they can change the terms of service without your consent. So in short, the money in the bank doesn't actually belong to you. They have no reserves, and their sources of being able to handle withdrawals are all dropping at a very fast rate. And we talk about CBDCs and censorship, but we're already seeing censorship with the existing banking system, whether it's the Canadian truckers, Dr. Mercola, and his coworkers and family members had their Chase bank accounts shut down. Kanye West lost his account and had $100 million frozen. Nigel Farage in the UK, and I just even saw this recently. Nick Fuentes. Whatever you think about these people, their money is being seized. They seized $500,000 and never gave it back. They still haven't given it back. And this is a tactic that's used, by the way. The Department of Justice comes in and they claim there's an ongoing investigation. So you're never charged with anything. You're never told what is actually going on. They freeze your money and they have no obligation to actually, they can have that process go on indefinitely and freeze your money. So CBDs are bad, but to be clear, the existing system is already bad. There's no reason people should want to keep their money in banks today. And it's only going to get worse. And so I'm going to go. So CBDCs are almost here. The dollar is collapsing. I believe it's a controlled demolition. I think that they know that a crash is coming, and they already know that they have a solution in place. Well, let's look at what's going on with crypto. I'm going to play this video of Roger Ver. Let's see if this actually comes through. This is from 2012 at a Free State Project event.
So excited about Bitcoin. I can't talk about it while sitting down. So, it's like the money supply to pay people all around the world. Stop using their money. Use Bitcoin. And the answer is here. We can put a stop to all of that. You don't have to support them in any way. Start using Bitcoin. There are so many websites that accept Bitcoin now. More and more are coming online every day. If you have a business, you need to start accepting Bitcoin. What Bitcoin allows every single person in this room and on the planet who has access to the internet, you can have your own private bank account, right? It's called a Bitcoin account, and it's impossible for the government to seize your account. It's mathematically impossible for anyone to block you from sending or receiving money with anyone else anywhere in the world. And if you're careful about how you use it, it can be done anonymously as well. This totally strips government's control over the money supply away. There's nothing they can do about it. There's no way they can stop it. The only way they can stop it would be to shut down the entire internet in the entire world, and that's not going to happen. This is what every libertarian's absolute dream come true. It's here, and it's called Bitcoin, and we need to spread the word to everybody about it. And I'm glad you guys are here, and we're here to answer your questions about it. And when you're done learning about it here today, tell your friends, tell your family, help them set up Bitcoin wallets, tell everybody that you know about Bitcoin. Anytime you need to buy something, ask the merchant if they'll allow you to pay in Bitcoin. And anytime you receive US dollars, convert them to Bitcoins and use them as Bitcoins. We need to spread this, and the world is going to be a much, much, much better place because of it. And it's not a question of if this is going to happen. It's just a question of how soon it's going to happen. And with your help, we can make it happen sooner rather than later.
So that was actually the first time that I ever heard Roger speak. That was one of the first times I ever even heard about Bitcoin. And there are a lot of people that actually heard about, that are OGs that heard about Bitcoin for the first time from Roger in that room. And that was the ethos of Bitcoin. It was peer-to-peer cash. People were using it for transactions. And in New Hampshire, there were stores and restaurants that were accepting Bitcoin. The Free State Project has been accepting Bitcoin for its events for more than a decade. This is a picture from another pre-state event, Liberty Forum. This was the first ever Bitcoin ATM, and I actually used this. I was one of the first people to use this Bitcoin ATM. So there was a lot of excitement, a lot of enthusiasm around peer-to-peer digital cash. And then something happened. So by 2017, we were in a situation where major retailers were accepting Bitcoin. Overstock.com, Expedia, Microsoft, Steam. People were really starting to use this, and there was a ton of enthusiasm. And then all of a sudden, because of the way that Bitcoin is structured, it has small blocks. It can only handle a certain number of transactions. But it was designed to increase the block size. So the solution to this would have simply been to just increase the block size to handle more transactions. But it turns out that the process was hijacked, and they kept the low 7 transactions per second rate, and changed the narrative from Bitcoin is digital cash for the world that's fast and accessible and inexpensive, to now it's digital gold. And Roger was there throughout all of this. And in his book, Hijacking Bitcoin, he talks about specifically what happened, how it happened, who was involved. He was in the meetings. He was in a lot of these meetings. And most of this book isn't Roger telling his version of the story or him venting. He's actually providing quotes largely from the developers that were involved in keeping Bitcoin slow and expensive. And so he puts this book out, and then again, it actually had a pretty big impact right away. I mean, I interviewed him. I mean, I know I got blocked by many of the Bitcoin core developers right away, actually within like a half an hour of publishing a review of the book. And I've had people reach out to me that said, wow, I was fooled. I thought Bitcoin was one thing, and now I'm learning that it's something else entirely. Well, when you dig into it, it actually gets even worse, and you find that there is a tie to central bank digital currencies. Now, Roger doesn't go into any of the CBDC stuff in his book. I actually go into more of this in my book, but it turns out that there's quite a bit of overlap. So in 2016, I mentioned earlier, this MIT started what was called a digital currency initiative. And I'll back up a step. Bitcoin developers had been funded by largely a group called the Bitcoin Foundation. So this was a nonprofit that was formed. Roger was one of the co-founders. Gavin Andreessen, who was one of the early devs who Satoshi actually handed the keys off to, and some others. And they would fund the development of the project. There was some internal stuff that happened in 2015. And then all of a sudden, magically, the MIT Digital Currency Initiative and Multimedia Lab took over funding of Bitcoin core devs. And all of a sudden, in a short period of time, a few things happened. The narrative shifted from peer-to-peer cash to digital gold. They started implementing things like Lightning Network and SegWit. And then shortly thereafter, they started work on the US retail CBDC pilot. And in fact, there are overlapping devs that worked on SegWit, Lightning Network, and the US retail CBDC. In particular, a guy named Corey Fields not only worked on Lightning Network and SegWit, he is a co-author of the US retail CBDC. So as we dig into this more, what we find is, and Roger talks a lot about this company Blockstream, which a bunch of the developers from Bitcoin formed a company. And this company, Blockstream, creates what are called second layer solutions to the problem of Bitcoin being slow and expensive. So they have a direct financial interest in, they make money by Bitcoin being slow and expensive so that they can develop these other solutions. This guy right here, Joi Ito, was in charge of the chair of the MIT group that oversaw all 3 of these US CBDC pilots. He was also the co-founder of a venture capital group that invested in Blockstream, and he funded Lightning Network and SegWit developers. And he also took money from Jeffrey Epstein, which is the reason that he actually had to ultimately resign from MIT. And at some point in 2017, Jeffrey Epstein did one interview about Bitcoin. But in 2017, Jeffrey Epstein was out there saying that he's bullish on Bitcoin, but he doesn't see Bitcoin as a currency. He sees it as a store of value. So we've had this complete narrative shift. And this goes into a little bit more detail, but it's kind of, this guy Joi Ito invests in Blockstream in 2014. Then in 2015, Digital Currency Group. Then MIT takes over the funding of the Bitcoin developers. And then 2 years later, then Blockstream takes over the funding of the Bitcoin developers. And then you have Corey Fields working on the development of SegWit and Lightning. And then he moves over to the US retail CBDC. And then, you know, as I discussed earlier, you have this guy, Steven Nerioff, who was basically extorted by the Department of Justice to turn over information and to try to get indictments on people in the crypto liberty community like Roger Ver and Patrick Byrne and Bruce Fenton and Naomi Brockwell. And then they finished Project Hamilton Stage 2 in 2022. And then in that same year, Joe Biden signs an executive order authorizing the expiration of the CBDC. So they're 6 years into working on a U.S. retail CBDC when Biden says, oh, yeah, I'm going to authorize the exploration of it. And so all of these things on here, you might say, oh, these sound like conspiracy theories. Google all of this. I mean, this information is all publicly available. All of these things absolutely did happen. And so the thing is, when I go back to my very first experience with Bitcoin, when I first used Bitcoin in 2012, it was better, faster, cheaper money. And from my previous experience with startups and dealing with credit card processors, I immediately saw the value. Much less expensive to use, not having third parties in the middle. I mean, I used to have to get a bank loan. I had to put up a letter of credit just to be able to process credit cards in 1995 because no one was doing commerce over the internet and the credit card processors didn't want to take the risk that the transactions were fraudulent. So, I mean, every business I've done has had some sort of friction related to the fiat financial system. So in 2010, going all the way up to like 2015 or so, Bitcoin was it. It was a better, faster, cheaper product, and it didn't have banks or governments involved. But since that time, since Bitcoin was hobbled and remained at 7 transactions per second, the world has gone by. So Venmo, Apple Pay, Google Pay, Zelle, FedNow, none of these things existed when Bitcoin was launched. And now they have far surpassed Bitcoin in terms of, you know, doing retail transactions, and people have become very comfortable with using these things. And again, this narrative is now, well, Bitcoin is not digital, it's digital gold, not digital cash. It has to be a store of value first. And then some people have made the statement, well, people don't want to use digital currencies. People use predominantly electronic payment systems. And the fiat world has absolutely leapfrogged Bitcoin in this regard. And so as I mentioned earlier, there are now estimated, 1.3 billion CBDC accounts globally, which is more than twice of crypto. And I'm going to come back on this, and this leads into why I'm saying, this Manhattan Project. Let's look at what's going on here. We're losing. I mean, crypto is completely getting destroyed by not only the traditional financial system, but even by CBDCs. And most people don't know about this at all. Most people think CBDCs are a long off pipe dream and aren't paying attention. They're just looking at the price of the coin on any given day, in which I'll say and I'm not here to say one coin is better than another, as I'll get to later. We need a multiple coin, multiple asset approach just because that's how far behind we are at this point. But Bitcoin has a market cap that's like half the size of Apple, and it's not even twice the size of the dollar value of frequent flyer points. So this isn't really that big. It's not competing in any material way in terms of being an alternative for cash. So you remember the clip that I played of Roger, and Roger was kind of the standard bearer for Bitcoin. I mean, yes, certainly it's an open source project, but he was the one out there investing in companies, getting everybody excited, and that was what it was all about. It was about freedom and people being able to trade. Now, this is a clip from Michael Saylor, and so let's see the new standard bearer.
At the end of the day, I think there'll be know your customer this, there'll be anti-money laundering that, there'll be tax regulations, there'll be some back and forth over what you can do, there'll be concerns about privacy. That's why I look at Bitcoin and I think it's pretty clear. If the use case is store of value, well, like 7.8 billion people on Earth need a store of value, and probably the value of that is 100 to 300 trillion dollars, right? That's enough. That's good. If the use case is currency, replace the dollar and the euro, that seems like that's just intentionally inflammatory. We don't need to replace the euro and the dollar. The banker's going to be upset about replacing the euro.
So that's that's the new standard bearer. We don't need to compete with the euro, the dollar. We don't want to go up against Visa or MasterCard. We're going to comply with all the KYC, AML. It's all just a store of value. I mean, what an unbelievable shift. And by the way, it's completely against what was stated in the white paper. But of course, the problem with all of this is since Bitcoin was launched, central banks and others took notice. And so they've out innovated. They've now created something better, and their CBDCs are something that we actually have to be able to compete with. And it's not going to be Bitcoin, BTC, that is the answer. And look, if you like Bitcoin as a store of value, invest in it as a store of value. But what I'm saying is we need something to counteract CBDCs. And it absolutely is not BTC. And the people that are out championing Bitcoin the most don't even want it to be. And so we've gone from the situation where it's about having a new currency that you use directly with somebody to now people buying BlackRock ETFs, where you're investing in a financial vehicle and BlackRock doesn't even hold the Bitcoin. Coinbase holds the Bitcoin. And when you sell your part of the ETF, you don't get paid in Bitcoin, you get paid in fiat currency. This is completely removed from peer-to-peer transactions. So why should we be concerned about all this? Well, again, I'm going to go back to now, this Project Hamilton CBDC can do 1.8 million transactions per second. The traditional financial system, so Visa, MasterCard can do at peak 65,000 transactions per second. FedNow can do 10,000 transactions per second. Now that's peak. On average, there's about 2,000 transactions per second for credit cards. BTC, Bitcoin, is at 7 transactions per second. And I know you might say, well, there's Lightning Network, but I have to say Lightning Network has proven not to catch on in terms of adoption. And in fact, there are difficulties with Lightning Network ever achieving adoption because of this 1 megabyte block size. You can only have up to 1% of the global population actually on the Lightning Network at any one time without increasing the block size, which they have refused to do. The other problem with Lightning Network is it sets up these things called payment channels. And if I'm trying to send money to somebody I don't know, but I'm trying to route it through a person that I do know, if they don't have the amount of money that I'm trying to send to the third person, we can't complete the transaction. So what that means is for the system to work, you end up having to have big hubs that provide liquidity to the system. Well, because of know your customer and anti-money laundering laws, those big hubs are being shut down already in the United States. Exodus Wallet, Wallet of Satoshi. So the services that were actually onboarding people to Lightning Network have already exited that business for regulatory reasons. So Lightning Network is not a solution. So somebody says here, I'm going to answer some of these questions. BitPay makes you identify just to set up an account, and they're not very friendly to work with. So I'm going to say that I'll talk about my experience living on crypto and why we're having this meeting today, which is that a lot of people using crypto involves buying debit cards and it involves buying gift cards. And that's not really a solution. What we need is actual direct peer-to-peer transactions. And the reason we don't have that isn't that people aren't interested in it. It's that compared to the traditional financial system, the crypto wallets are hard to use. The point of sale systems are not only hard to use, but a lot of the companies have gone out of business. And so there's been no stability. And I'll talk about kind of the experience that I've had in that. But in short, we just don't have competitive offerings. And I've used BitPay, and BitPay has a lot of regulatory issues surrounding them, which I'll talk about, which is why we need an open source solution that isn't controlled by a third party, that is decentralized. But just to put in perspective here, again, crypto is, we are behind. We are behind the traditional financial system now, and we're well behind CBDCs. And what's funny is all of this government regulation is happening within crypto. And you got to ask yourself why. People aren't using crypto. This is something that the Federal Reserve came out with. And if you look at this, so only 1% of the population is using cryptocurrency to buy something or make a payment. So, I mean, it's actually going down. We're actually, pretty precipitously dropping in terms of people using it as money. And even as an investment, percentage of people that are holding it as an investment, it's only 7%. So, again, a lot of people will say to me, the argument that I hear is, well, it takes a long time for technologies to take off. Well, it didn't for Instagram, it didn't for TikTok, it didn't for Venmo, it didn't for Zelle. So, so literally you can only make excuses for so long and say, well, it took gold this long for such and such to happen. It's like we're in completely different times. Payment technologies have been able to achieve mass adoption. When Elon Musk launches X payments, it will probably dwarf Bitcoin within less than a year in terms of user accounts, probably less than a month. So it's not about aversion to technology. It's about the technology not being easy to use and not being competitive from a cost perspective. So I mentioned, I got into this in part because of what I saw happening to Jeremy Kauffman with his company Library, which offers a censorship-resistant version of YouTube. He was targeted by the SEC for 5 years, and they forced him out of business. Ian Freeman, who I learned about the same time from Roger, or in the same place, in fact, about Bitcoin. He is in federal prison for 8 years just for selling Bitcoin without a money transmitter license. And I will have to add that he actually got an opinion letter. He didn't think that he needed a money transmitter license. He actually sought counsel. He didn't think he was doing anything wrong, and he actually took effort to protect himself. So, it was a couple of people. And of course, Ross Ulbricht is serving 2 life sentences plus 40 years for essentially operating a website. And this is what I was talking about a year ago. So if I was giving my just general presentation, this is where I was. Well, now here we are. And now we've learned that Stephen Narioff was basically, extorted by the Department of Justice and had his whole life kind of upended by the DOJ. And they tried to push him to basically rat on everybody else. The people behind the Samurai wallet have been arrested. The CEO, CZ of Binance, is serving 4 years in prison. We are looking at the Tornado Cash guy, just received 64 months. Arya Demeza, 18 months. And then Roger Ver, again, out of the blue, left the United States 10 years ago. But he happens to write a book exposing Bitcoin, and then now all of a sudden he is in Spain, and he's in the same prison that John McAfee was in, and McAfee was there for 8 months. And honestly, it's been hard to get a hold of. I'm doing this event on Friday, and we can't get audio or video from Roger. I'm trying to get a written statement. So he's been in there for 3 weeks, and you'll note he has made 0 public statement. There is one kind of generic statement from his lawyer, oh, he's in good spirits, so on and so forth. But they locked McAfee up for 8 months. And so again, from my perspective, this is all designed, if you look at why these people have been imprisoned and have been charged, it's to demoralize and have a chilling effect on the adoption of crypto and to stop an alternative to CBDCs. So they don't want mixing services. They don't want privacy. They don't want exchanges. They don't want people buying, Ian offered ATMs. And, with Roger, he hasn't even been here for 10 years. And they're going after him for, I'm not going to go into all the details, but it's a clearly manufactured case. And so to wait a decade, it's clearly to have a chilling effect. But that's only the beginning. And a lot of this information, a lot of the things that you're seeing on the screen here have just come about in the last 4 weeks. And so some people will say, oh, well, I don't like Gary Gensler, the head of the SEC, and, he's losing. The SEC has successfully cracked down on over 127 companies. You may see that, there's a thing going on with Ripple and an appeal and everything else. Overwhelmingly, Gensler has won on his enforcement actions, and they are going after every exchange. There isn't a single U.S. exchange that's not being sued by the SEC at this point, and those are the ones that are left. I mean, to be honest, most of the U.S. exchanges are already gone. Coin mixing services are gone. Custodia, which is a bank that a crypto-friendly bank, has been denied by the Federal Reserve. The Commodity Futures Trading Commission has did just 47 actions in 2023 alone. They've been going after DeFi and stablecoins. Biden has been very aggressive in pushing his executive order and also threatening to do vetoes. We'll see what happens with this, ridiculous bill today, which I'll talk about. You have Congress right now putting up bills, so-called pro-crypto. And this is something that, again, if you follow politics at all, if you still believe in it, never believe in what the bill title says. Usually the bill means the opposite of what the bill title is. So they've just passed a blockchain bill, and people are on Twitter celebrating. Oh, great. The government is finally deciding to be competitive. All this bill did was give the Secretary of Commerce more power to regulate blockchain. I mean, the Secretary of Commerce under Biden, who currently has an executive order to regulate digital assets and push a CBDC. This isn't a win. Or this thing today where people are like, oh, this is a big win, this FIT 21 bill. Well, you dig into it, and all it does is add extra regulation, and it gives banks more power and more control. But this is by no means a pro-freedom bill. So we have all of this stuff on the screen going on, people going to jail, businesses being shut down, and people are thinking that giving banks more control over crypto is a win. And it certainly is not a win when you consider that at the end of this process with CBDCs, it's going to be banks that are actually operating the CBDCs. So for instance, if you take stable coins like Tether and USDC, and then you add all of these regulations that basically make it so that you have to be a regulated, registered bank or financial institution. So you shut them out of business. And now all of a sudden, there's really not much difference between a CBDC and a Citibank or JP Morgan stablecoin, right? There's nothing to say that they can't program a stablecoin. So there are several different ways that we get enhanced surveillance and edge towards a central bank digital currency. So this is going on. I forgot to mention, so we have not only the selective targeting of Roger, but now the IRS is going to require 1099s for self-custody assets as well. So I mentioned regulated liability network. They're going to require you to register all of your assets and have those assets tied to CBDC, and they're already taking the steps to do it. The IRS is already doing that. The FBI has come out and said, if you buy crypto from a service that didn't have a money transmitter license, and it turns out it was from a pool of funds that were involved in criminal activity, they can come after you for your coins. So they are going after self-custody next. They're going after privacy coins next. And all of this is happening at an incredibly rapid pace just in the last 4 weeks. I'm going to switch a little bit before I get into the kind of the proposed strategy moving forward, but I'm going to switch a little bit off of crypto and talk about gold and silver, because usually it's one or the other. Crypto people will say shiny rocks, and then the gold and silver people will make some statement about, imaginary numbers and all of this other stuff. But I think that there's a path forward to work together. There's a great book called Pirate Money that has really kind of kicked off a movement. I'm actually an advisor to an organization called Center for Sound Money, which is going around the country and trying to help states pass legislation to make gold and silver legal tender at the state level. And so to remove the CBDC threat and actually remove the federal government threat. And so most of this involves not only making it legal tender, removing taxation on precious metals, whether that's sales tax or capital gains tax, and putting some other conditions in. And you may not know this, but there are already 4 states where gold is legal tender. Gold and silver are legal tender: Utah, Wyoming, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. And in fact, gold has been legal tender in Utah since 2011. So this is something that has been kind of growing as a movement. Now, my perspective is, there's no need to wait for legislation. I mean, there's just start using gold and silver now, because we don't have time to waste. But I want to make you aware that that is going on. And there are a lot of other initiatives at the state level that are designed to change UCC laws and to try to ban and prevent CBDCs at the state level. Now, of course, as much as the states are doing this, we know that, FDR confiscated gold, and that you can use interstate commerce clauses and various other things to kind of run over any of the state laws anyway in an emergency. So as much as I like the fact that this is going on, and I think that it should go on, the most important thing to do is actually start using these alternative currencies. And one of the things that I've been doing is, I've been living off crypto since 2019, and I'll talk about how that went. I just did a Corbett Report interview on this, but recently I've started using gold backs, which, this is 1/10 of an ounce of gold in bill form. And so now you can actually, gold has actually out innovated BTC as a store of value in the last 10 years. You can actually use gold to buy a cup of coffee. You can use gold to buy groceries. And so they have different denominations of gold backs from 1/1000th of an ounce up to 1/50th of an ounce. And so it's a really growing trend. It started in Utah. All of this kind of emanated out of there. And in New Hampshire, there are 150 businesses already that take gold backs. There are 2,000 businesses nationwide that accept gold backs. So this is a valid thing to consider in a mix. And this is just a map of, in the various states that have gold backs, where the retailers are. And there's some other things you can do with it's called a UPMA gold account. You can essentially set up an account. You have a trust automatically set up. This is all based in Utah. You can buy and sell gold, silver, and gold backs. Now it's vaulted. It's not in your physical custody, although you can actually you can take full custody of it, or you can choose not to, and you can choose to actually send gold, silver, and gold backs through an online account. So you can actually pay merchants through an online account. So you're not even giving them the gold back. You're essentially giving them a tokenized form of it. I'm still a big believer in self-custody, but these are some interesting solutions that are out there. And this is just a list of some of the retailers in New Hampshire. And there's even this concept of I just got mine this week, a Visa branded debit card backed by gold. So you can keep your gold, silver, and gold backs in that UPMA account that I showed you. And then what you do is you actually use pawning laws to pawn the gold or the silver to yourself. And that gets you out of actually paying the capital gains tax. So this is a way where you're never holding fiat and then you're spending gold and silver on a Visa branded debit card. So I'm just bringing this up in terms of, the breadth of different options out there. And there are a number of companies that are doing tokenized gold and silver as well, in addition to the gold back thing. And I've just started investigating some of these, looking at Kinesis Money in particular, which is a very interesting one because you can actually buy tokenized gold and silver, and then you can use tokenized gold and silver to buy crypto. So I thought that was a really fascinating concept. I mean, in terms of, being able to exchange between precious metals and crypto in an exchange type of setting. So, so just to let you know, those things are there. But what I've learned throughout this process is, so what do we need? We need a multi-coin open source wallet and point of sale system that is easy to use and that integrates crypto, gold, and silver. So hopefully now with this is the backdrop, and I apologize, I know that's lengthy, but I wanted to go through it because I have yet to find very many people that see all of the pieces, that see where CBDCs are, where the dollar weakness is, and just how bad the infighting and deterioration has been within crypto in terms of its relative competitiveness to traditional finance and CBDC. So now we can kind of get into the solution side of this. I did this interview, it just dropped yesterday on the Corbett Report, but where I talk about how I've lived off of crypto, gold, and silver. And here's the thing, so a lot of it is it's buying. So I live in New Hampshire, so I do have an advantage of there are businesses here. You can buy food. You can buy meat. You can actually there are farms that will accept these alternative currencies. And I'm going to go to PorkFest in, next month, and no one will be using fiat, the entire time they're there, which is great. But most of the time I travel. Most of what I'm doing right now is going around the country warning people about CBDCs and trying to get them to use gold, silver, and crypto. So most of the time I've used debit cards or gift cards. And that's not really a solution. I mean, it's not really peer-to-peer. If all of a sudden they pass a law banning the use of crypto for debit cards, then that entire solution no longer works. And so there are a lot of really interesting solutions that have been built up, like BitPay and Spritz Finance, that make it so you can pay your bills, you can pay your mortgage and everything else. But overwhelmingly, these are just connections that interface with the fiat world. It's not truly peer-to-peer. And so that's actually part of the problem. And I will tell you, in my own experience, because somebody will say, this crypto is better than this crypto. My position going into this isn't about, I want this one crypto to win and I'm only going to use this crypto. My journey in this has been, what can I actually use to buy and sell things? And so I've used a combination of different cryptos, but those cryptos change over time. I've used predominantly Bitcoin Cash, and I'd use Bitcoin Cash with BitPay as a debit card. Well, last year, and I'd done that for a number of years, 4 years, whatever it happened to be. And last year, when the 4 banks collapsed, even though the bank that BitPay was working with wasn't one of the 4, their bank severed the relationship, or somebody severed the relationship. And so all of a sudden I got like 6 days notice that I had to take all of my funds off of the debit card, or that was it. They were shutting it down. And they were going to find a new banking partner by the end of last year, and they still haven't. So we're almost halfway into this year. So now I can't use the BitPay debit card. Now I actually have to switch from one coin to another. If I have to use a debit card, I switch from Bitcoin Cash to Litecoin, and I use a crypto.com debit card, which I don't like to use because crypto.com is affiliated with the WEF. So I've then moved now to doing gold and silver backed debit cards. So when you see this interview, I mean, I don't describe this as being rosy. It's actually gotten worse, significantly worse, trying to use crypto in the last 2 years. And it's for a variety of reasons. A lot of it is because of the regulatory crackdown. A lot of it is because it's hard to acquire crypto because of now all of the KYC laws, and because services that used to provide interesting and useful services have completely shut down those services. And so this is I guess the problem and the opportunity. So as I get into this, I want to say up front, this is a newly formed idea. And this comes out of so my personal experience with this. I don't have any funding to date. In fact, this needs to be an open source project. I have formed a nonprofit called the Daylight Freedom Foundation, and we just launched the website for that today, which is daylightfreedom.org. And if you check that out, that actually will have, information on everything that we're talking about today is in one place. I didn't originally form this Daylight Freedom Foundation to have anything to do with open source, software. I mean, it's the organization is generally about promoting free will and abundance and decentralization and love. And it fits in it, but it wasn't kind of what we initially thought we would be doing with it. And I don't even know if we will use it, but I'm just saying that it's there as a concept. But we have a dilemma, and actually, hold on, let me see. All right, I'll get to that in a second. All right, before I get to that, so I want to talk about the foundational principles for this project. So what this is all about is we need a solution that is decentralized. We need a solution that isn't owned by a corporate entity. We have seen time and time again, none of the original exchanges I used, none of the original wallets I use still exist. In fact, if I think probably the average lifespan of a wallet or an exchange is probably like 2 years. This is just historically going, if I go all the way back to 2012, that's just the reality of it. It's private companies have not been able to provide point of sale systems, and it's not really been a great sustainable model for wallet providers either. So this has been an issue. So it can't be something that is stuck at a corporate organizational level. And it can't be something that utilizes at its core, the App Store. So you can't have something that's contingent on Apple or Google being able to shut you down. And so as convenient as that might make certain things, that is kind of a no-go, because again, if you look at it this way, they roll out CBDCs and then all of a sudden they say, well, you can't use crypto anymore. Then all of a sudden those wallets and some of those services that are in the App Store are shut down. Exchanges are shut down. And so people say, well, you can't ban crypto. Well, technically you can't, but boy, you certainly can make it awfully difficult to use, which is why I think only 1% of people are using crypto to buy and sell things today. Anyway, so it's absolutely critical that it is decentralized. It's critical that it's competitive. As I showed with Zelle and Venmo and everything else, traditional finance has created solutions that are easy to use and relatively low cost, and certainly relatively low cost compared to a BTC or Ethereum. So we have to look at this as we have to compete. We now have to say, look, we're behind. These CBDCs are fast. Yeah, it's complete tyranny, right? They want to surveil everything. But the people that are in crypto because they want the separation of money and state, and because they believe in, getting rid of central banks and everything else, all of those people are already in crypto. And even then, it's only a 1% adoption rate. So the product actually has to be competitive with existing systems and with CBDCs. It has to be secure. It has to have a user-centric design. So again, I've been a serial entrepreneur for 30 years. And one of the things I'll say is, and when I started my first company, it was probably like this too. I was 19 when I started my first company, and it was an e-commerce company. And a lot of our designs, I mean, I look back on it now, it's like, oh, okay, our lead designer wanted to experiment with horizontal scrolling, and we did all this other stuff, and it just, a lot of crypto is 20-year-old guys developing interfaces for other 20-year-old guys. And the truth is, money shouldn't be complicated. Money shouldn't require technical expertise. Money should be accessible and easy for everyone to use. So we need to take into consideration people of all ages and all different technical backgrounds and come up with solutions that are competitive and that are user-friendly. And the last approach is, and I know this is tough already even announcing this, but we have to collaborate. I know everybody thinks that their coin is the best or can be the best, but we're competing against 100,000 transactions per second with the traditional system today, 1.8 million with CBDCs. There is not a single coin that gets us there today. We have to actually recognize the fact that if we're looking at overall transaction capabilities and even buying power expressed in market cap, there isn't an alternative that actually delivers all of that. And of course, Bitcoin has hobbled itself out of being in the running as it stands as a medium of exchange. So I'm going to talk about, so what does that mean in terms of, well, what cryptos? And all of the cryptos that I'm going to list here are cryptos that I've used. And I know some people in the communities, at various points, and some more than others, and some I've only gotten to know more recently. But here are the criteria. The transaction costs have to be competitive. So if FedNow is offering, a fraction of a cent for transactions, and if Venmo and these other things are kind of coming down in price, and we know CBDCs are going to be virtually free, then our solution has to offer something that's similar. So if we have a point of sale system, a merchant has to look at this and say, yeah, okay, this is competitive. Not I'm paying $3 per transaction, or I'm paying $14 for gas, or I'm waiting 3 hours for a transaction. Fundamentally, that's out. That will not work. And this is why we're in the predicament that we're in, is that people have spent a lot of time obsessing over their relative positions in the crypto world without understanding what's going on in the world around. The assets themselves, the coin should be decentralized. So something that has a corporate structure, did an ICO, or uses proof of stake is centralized and can be stopped any of a number of ways, whether it's through SEC enforcement or, proof of stake isn't really a great option anyway, in terms of being it's just it's a new form of the same system. And then we need to combine buying power and market cap. And so this to me is these are the standards that we should look at for cryptos. And again, I'm talking about cryptos, gold and silver, but I'm just talking about the crypto part of this. And so the coins that I've used that I think would fit for this are Bitcoin Cash, Monero, Zcash, Litecoin, Ravencoin, and Dash. And you can see in this table some of the more important points. There's probably some contention over whether these are accurate transaction per second. I've actually struggled. I've even reached out to some people. Is Monero 1,000? Is it 1,700? Is it theoretical? Bitcoin Cash just did an upgrade to their system for dynamic block sizing. Zcash and Litecoin are at a lower level of transactions, but nevertheless, these are still solutions that offer sub 1 cent transaction fees, offer some amount of transactional capability, and then you can see what the relative market caps are of each of these coins. But then there's the question of, well, how easy is it to acquire, right? And I mean, this is a challenge that I'll talk about in my experience traveling across the country trying to introduce people to crypto. I think you'll hopefully find some of this eye-opening, but some of these are available on almost all of the remaining exchanges. Some are on a few. And then, the privacy coins now are pretty much getting booted from the exchanges, which makes them difficult to acquire. And then there is the issue of privacy itself. And so that's certainly something that, is a factor for consideration. Although I think unless we have a combined solution that competes with CBDCs, privacy or no privacy, I don't know what you're going to do with a privacy coin if, there are 1,000 people across the world that use it and you can't buy day-to-day items with it. So we need to kind of come up with a combined solution. But with each of these cryptos on the list, of course, each crypto can accelerate and compete on their own. All of these could increase their own block size or transactional capabilities, and could potentially make changes and improvements in privacy. So this is just where these coins are today, but I've used all of these and I've had occasion to use all of these. And so when people say to me, well, just use this coin or that coin, it's like, well, okay, I've sold my books and, I was at PorcFest. And so some people only have Zcash, some people only have Monero, and they're not interested in using an exchange or converting their coin for me. I'd rather try to get multiple coins to work together than try to push people into one particular coin, because we already know how that works. We have 20,000 coins and we have a completely fragmented space where people get outright tribal about their coins. And so the net effect of this is 1% adoption and new people aren't coming on board. So I've introduced people to crypto since 2012, and I've gone to different states giving just kind of my generic talk, but now I've started to do these 4-hour workshops. And you're hearing some of the content today, but in these workshops, I explain what's going on from like technocracy perspective. And I discuss CBDCs, Fiat, all of that. And then the last half is hands-on. My goal isn't to just scare people. I mean, I think we've had enough fear porn. My goal is to enlighten people and to empower people so that they come out of the workshop being able to use self-custody assets. The book that I wrote, The Final Countdown, is designed to be self-contained. So you should be able to read this book, and when you're done reading the book, you know where to buy gold, where to buy silver, where to buy crypto, with step-by-step instructions for how to download a wallet. But what I found doing all these talks is people understood the CBDC threat, but they were still too afraid to take that first step to actually acquire these self-custody assets. So I decided to do these workshops. And so almost 2 weeks ago, I was in San Jose. I was in Silicon Valley, and I was at Calvary Church. And Calvary Church was one of the only churches in California to defy the lockdown orders. And they were fined and lawsuits and everything related to that. And so this is a defiant group. The Liberty Forum of Silicon Valley actually helped sponsor me and secure the facility and help bring in other partners to get people to the event. So we had 100 people, and these are people that have means. There were a lot of boomers in the audience, but a lot of these people were engineers. These are people that worked in Silicon Valley. Now I can give them a gold back and they get the gold back, but I went through the process of trying to simplify as much as I could the crypto experience. And somebody, a generous donor, actually funded giving the audience Bitcoin Cash, and also funded the creation of a faucet so that all the audience had to do was log in, scan a QR code, go to a website, and then paste their address, and then they would receive $5 worth of Bitcoin cash. And I will tell you, even with this smart, engaged group, we got probably less than a 50% take rate of people that ultimately could figure out how to do this. And I used the Exodus wallet, which is intended to be an easy to use. I've used it. It's an easy to use multi-coin wallet. I mean, it is something that's in the App Store and everything else. And even still, with multiple emails ahead of time telling them how to set up the wallet and go through the whole process, it was just confusing. And it was something that, I realized in explaining in this workshop how I've been living off of crypto, and then watching how they tried to set up the wallets and integrate with things, that we just don't have a viable solution to compete. They can use Venmo. I mean, they have Google Pay. Again, these are Silicon Valley people, and the crypto stuff is just not there. And it's been 15 years, and it really has gotten worse, especially in the last 2 years. But I mean, sometimes you buy a crypto and then it gets booted off the exchange, or all of a sudden, depending upon if you're dealing with proof of stake, some of the coins have issues. And, if you're dealing with MetaMask and everything else, hacks, people don't want to deal with that. And I will say this in all of the talks that I've given, because we get so caught up in crypto fighting over, the block size war was already fought. Again, only 1% are using this. The majority of the world knows nothing about any of this. I actually do a poll in my talk, and more people have heard of Sam Bankman-Fried than have heard of Satoshi Nakamoto. Most people, the majority of people in these talks, don't even know that you can use cryptocurrency to buy and sell things. They only know of it as a speculative asset. And in fact, their opinion mostly of it is a bad speculative asset, which is why only 7% even own crypto, let alone the 1% that actually use it. So when you sit there and when you travel across the country and when you meet with people and you sit in a room, you realize if we don't have a viable product and a competitive product, it's over for all of crypto. The adoption is already dwindling, but this now comes down to, this isn't 2012 where Bitcoin is better, faster, cheaper. We're in a situation right now where our product offering is inferior. It's more expensive, it's harder to use, and it's slower. So with that, and I'll say that I've actually spent time working on merchant adoption as well. So sorry, I had to take off my headset ran out. So I've done a lot of merchant adoption. I've met with merchants. I've onboarded merchants to taking crypto directly. And this has happened all over the place in New Hampshire. Many restaurants, many stores. There was a store called the Bitcoin Shop in Portsmouth. And you'll see these websites that list all of these retailers that take crypto. But when you go to most of them, they don't actually take crypto. So basically what happened is somebody went and talked to the owner of one of these stores and said, hey, here, check this out. This is really cool. And like, oh yeah, this is great. And they do a transaction at that time and they get added onto a map. But then there's no follow through because these point of sale systems aren't easy to use. A lot of them have gone out of business. There's no service, there's no support, and you can't train people on how to use it. So most of this is why it's at 1%, and most of the 1% is actually people using gift cards or debit cards. My son used used Ravencoin. He did the first ever retail transaction using Ravencoin with a point of sale system called AnyPay. But again, when you look at it from the retailer's perspective, if I'm a retailer and I'm in Idaho or I'm in, wherever, Deerfield Beach, Florida, and you say to yourself, okay, well, here's a particular crypto and it has a $500,000 market cap. So that represents the amount of buying power for that crypto. If somebody signs up to take a single crypto with $1 billion market cap, how many people within even a 50-mile radius does that even equate to? Is it even worth the time to do any kind of sign up? This is why I say we've got to aggregate multiple coins and gold and silver to make it so that there's enough of a use case and enough business that it's worthwhile for the merchant. So the consumer, needs to have one wallet that handles all of these alternative assets, including gold and silver. And I haven't delved too much into how we do some of the integration with things like gold backs, but to have everything in one place that isn't kind of, again, tied to DeFi. Think about this from the perspective of, I wrote my book and I've kind of positioned this as, could a boomer with minimal technical experience use it? And if the answer is no, then, again, money shouldn't be hard. I guarantee you when they roll out the CBDC, it will not be difficult to use. They are spending a lot of time making sure that it is very easy to use and very accessible. And there tends to be in crypto almost it's bragging rights. It's like, well, okay, yes, I'm able to set up my own node. Why can't you do this? Oh, you can't set up a Lightning payment channel? Well, it was easy. I did it. That's not the right attitude to have. This has to be something that anybody can use, and something that is effective and competitive. And I've already talked about these points, but I'm going to hammer them again. It has to be competitive with traditional finance, with no app store or big tech. And for a point of sale system, it has to, for the merchant, have enough buying power that they'll actually get customers to make it worth the investment in time and training. It has to be easy to use, and it has to be stable. And again, in New Hampshire, because we've had a lot of early adopters and merchants that have signed up, we've had people sign up, and then, for various reasons, the company providing the point of sale system, well, if only 1% are using this for retail transactions anyway, that's hard to have and operate a for-profit business. And so most of the wallets, the point of sale systems have actually not been able to stick around and provide service or support. Now with that, to get into some of the specifics, we don't have to necessarily reinvent the wheel here, though, to create this solution. And I'm going to talk about some of the research that I've done, and it's not exhaustive, but as a starting point, AnyPay may be a place to go from a point of sale system perspective. So AnyPay was created by a couple of free staters here in New Hampshire, and it was actually fairly widely deployed. They integrated a number of different cryptocurrencies, very, kind of easy to use. And I think there were some issues regarding, Ian and the FBI and everything else. And so the guys just kind of left. I haven't seen them in New Hampshire, and the project just kind of withered away. There wasn't support for it. And I looked into it, and it turns out, and chatted with one of the devs, and they've now made it open source. So, I mean, as a starting point, we might be able to actually basically fork AnyPay as a starting point and have a multi-coin system that was actually functioning fairly well before the federal government came in and started, raiding all of my friends and all of the people in the Liberty crypto community in New Hampshire. So I just put that out there as a placeholder. I've been accepting crypto as a payment method since 2013. I've used it for political campaigns. I actually had a super PAC that was one of the first super PACs ever to take crypto. I mean, they're saying today Trump is the first presidential candidate to take crypto. I mean, I know people in New Hampshire that were taking crypto in 2012, and I had a super PAC that not only took crypto but paid volunteers using crypto. And I've tried a lot of systems, not only point of sale, but donor management and for everything. And one that I even use today on my site is Now Payments. And so Now Payments is a company. And so I don't think this is anything that can be necessarily forked, but there's some good ideas there, which is that, basically they have a very easy to use widget that you can configure for your site, WordPress or whatever it happens to be. Again, no app store, and you pick which coins you want to take, and then it converts those coins into whatever your reference coin is. So if you want it to be Bitcoin Cash or Monero, you can take all these other cryptos, and then what you get out at the end of the day is Bitcoin Cash. Now, I don't necessarily want to get into that side of things. I don't want to get into the exchange side of things and the money transmitter side of things, but what the idea from that I think is worth carrying is the idea of creating easy to use widgets, so that if we create this multi-asset payment system, it can be deployed across a number of sites. So it's not just a question of going to retailers and walking down the street and people that have storefronts. It's something that can be enabled for anybody that has an online business. It's basically an alternative to a Stripe or any of the other more centralized systems. And so again, I'm putting that out there just as a reference, but we're kind of early in the process. I've put together kind of an outline here of kind of the timetable for this. This is somewhat subject to change, the details, because I want to recruit a team to work on this. And so, but there are some dates that the most important thing is to recruit a lead product manager, a lead designer, and a lead coder. I think that's what we need right out of the gates, even before we fully evaluate what existing systems are out there. And I haven't done a lot of this stuff in a while. So I'm looking for people that are passionate about this, that are interested in participating and creating this kind of system. And then we can further recruit other core team members, and then begin kind of having weekly discussions about developing a minimum viable product. So I see this group of 3 people working with various stakeholders, talking to merchants and different users with different backgrounds. So get some boomers in there with minimal technical expertise, get some people with a wide range of experience with these things, and then come up with the specifications for a minimum viable product, and then shoot to July 22nd, kind of have a minimum viable product that's ready for public testing. And I'm not going to go through these specific line items, but with the goal being to, by the end of October, launch a version 1.0 of this product. So again, it doesn't have to be built from scratch. In fact, I think we probably can fork existing open source solutions, but we need to get kind of a core team in place and to start kind of meeting on this weekly to push these things forward. And again, I believe this really is DEFCON 1, based on the rate at which crypto is being regulated and the number of friends that I have that are thrown in prison. And, even when I was sitting in Silicon Valley, I'm like, okay, well, use Exodus, because if you use Exodus, you can buy crypto without setting up an exchange account and without going through full KYC. They use this, service where you could use a debit card. And as long as you were buying only a couple $100s worth of crypto, you didn't have to go through all of the process that you have to go through when setting up an exchange account. And now even that's changed. So even to just buy $100 worth of crypto through the Exodus wallet requires biometric screening, and it requires your ID and all of that other stuff. So these are things that change from week to week, and none of it's been in the right direction. So as someone's been living off of this stuff, every week is worse than the last. And so like the urgency on actually creating a solution that doesn't have a reliance on these fiat hooks is absolutely critical. So I'm looking for people that are passionate about building an alternative, that really believe in the mission. So it's just like, well, I want a job, or maybe I can try to do this. No, you have to really like, I'm not getting paid to do this. I am doing this. I'm doing everything that I'm doing because I truly believe that central bank digital currencies are the biggest single threat to human liberty. They are the basis for social credit systems, digital IDs, vaccine passports. And once they're put in place, once they can censor and program our money, we've essentially lost free will, and we will lose the ability to even protest on other liberty-related issues. So I view this as I've put 100% of my time trying to warn people about this. But after warning people and then seeing the deterioration of the products themselves within crypto, and then seeing the pace of CBDC development, I realized we have to build a better product or we don't have a chance. So looking for somebody that's flexible on payment as well. So again, I haven't finalized how this is going to be structured, but it's going to be decentralized, probably crowdfunding, project-based milestones. I do think there is funding for this. I think that once people understand how mission critical this is, I think people from the various cryptos that are participating in this and people from the gold and silver industry will have an incentive to build this, because everybody needs to onboard. Even if you're in gold, if you've been in gold and you're in Utah and it's been legal tender since 2011, well, it still hasn't hit mass adoption. Everybody is looking for easy mass adoption for alternative currencies, and nobody has delivered it yet. So I don't think this is necessarily an expensive endeavor, especially if we are able to fork existing code, but we do need to work on the specifics of how it's going to be rolled out. And I will say with open source, I mean, open source is not, this panacea that people want it to be. If anything, when you read Hijacking Bitcoin, I mean, you realize there really aren't, in general, people just developing code for free and then auditing code for free. Even with something like Bitcoin, somebody was paying those devs, and that's how it got to the position that it is. And this is this ongoing problem of how do you have a decentralized open source thing, but then not have it hijacked. And so I'm going to remain steadfast on the founding principles of what all this is about in terms of, decentralization and being competitive and being collaborative. And that is the mission here. And it's kind of an all in on that. So the number one priority right now is I'm looking for a product manager lead. I'm looking for a lead developer, and I'm looking for a lead user interface designer. In my previous life, 30 years ago, I had some good people that I worked with, but I don't now. And frankly, I'm more concerned about finding a designer than almost anything else, because it seems as though that's been completely missing. But what we've done is we've created daylightfreedom.org. And then if you go to /build, there's a form that you can fill out, and then you can basically select which of these areas that you're interested in or have expertise. And then I'm kind of building a database of that. And then we'll reach out and really just start having conversations with people and figuring out where this can go. I already have, even before doing this, there are probably 15 or 20 devs. Not very many designers, but I haven't even articulated until today this full vision. There are definitely a lot of people out there, but I want to recruit leads for each of these to help kind of work on shaping this overall process and shaping the minimum viable product. So again, check out daylightfreedom.org /build. And there are other recruits, and these things are also available on the forum as well. We're going to need security advisor, business development, QA, marketing specialists, a community manager, additional developers, and strategic advisors. Those are things that we're also going to need over time, but this is an early process. So getting those other three positions and finding people first is absolutely the most important thing. And as I said before, I think the funding for this, I know some people, I've been successful at fundraising in the past, and actually I believe that the mission here is critical. So I do believe we'll be able to get funding secured for this from the participating crypto communities, from gold and silver, from the pro liberty community, and maybe even from some participating merchants. But it is in the early stage on that front. I've also created a community on Twitter or X for us to stay in touch. For now, we'll obviously develop better tools for project management. But if that URL is not very friendly, just go to my Twitter, which is @AaronRDay, and search for DEFCON 1 project to stop CBDCs. Again, I've thrown this out here. I know it's a lot of information and a lot of background information, but I did want to go through it to explain how I got to where I am on this. And it's a fluid process, but I do want to pursue it aggressively. And I've had a lot of people call me in the last week that have been waiting for something like this to happen. So I think now we just have this new urgency of CBDCs and people being thrown in jail. Related to that, so that is kind of one of three things that I'm working on. And I'm going to say this, I've been trying to express the urgency of this CBDC thing since the beginning of last year. And like I said, I ran for president to try to get into the debates to warn people about this. And then I've seen more friends go to prison, and I've seen more difficulty in my own life using crypto, and it gets worse and worse. Finally, in the last month, I would say people are starting to platform me on this. And there's massive interest in doing these 4-hour workshops. But I'm at the point right now where, I don't sleep much as it is. And it's me, my wife, and a good friend of mine working on this. And that's it. And so this is not a well-funded enterprise. This is hey, I think we've got to go all in on this. So I could use help in other areas besides the technical development. So with these workshops, like the workshop that I did in San Jose, I really need to find a host. So I have hundreds of leads. People have gone to my website and they filled out a form saying they'd like to attend a workshop, but I need somebody on the ground that actually can handle the logistics, that actually has a venue, that actually hosts events regularly, that can serve as kind of an anchor point so that we can get other groups to come in and help co-market the event. So that's what we did in California with the Liberty Forum, and 4 or 5 other groups ended up participating, and that's what made that successful. So certainly you can go to daylightfreedom.org/empower, and if you want to sign up for a list to be notified of upcoming events, that's there. But if you can help with either event marketing or hosting or finding sponsors or finding organizations, we could use all the help, because literally it's just in the last 2 weeks, it's now nonstop. It's finally hit some kind of level of critical mass. And so now I'm just trying to figure out, wow, how can we get more help and how can we be more efficient with these processes? The other thing is the third area is I am a fellow at the Brownstone Institute. So I've written the final countdown, which, I recommend people read because it does give a good overview. But I am doing speaking engagements all over the country, not just the 4-hour workshops. So if you have any events that you think that I should be at, again, I'm trying to get in front of as many people as possible. I'm very serious about the DEFCON 1 aspect of this. And I've also started my own podcast, The Aaron Day Show. And the purpose of The Aaron Day Show, which I only do these, every couple of weeks, is to go in depth on all of the topics in the book. Since everything is changing frequently, the regulatory thing is changing. The technologies are changing, gold and silver, all of this other stuff. But then even going in depth on things like technocracy, I'd like to have Patrick Wood on. The purpose of these events is these are generally like 2+ hour interviews to go do a deep dive on the topics related to CBDCs and technocracy. So if you have any good guest ideas there. And I could really use help on the media side. So I've been very fortunate and very happy about some of the recent exposure. I did a Epoch Times American Thought Leaders interview that I thought was a good overview. Free Thought Project. The Corbett Report was just yesterday. I have my Brownstone articles, Zero Hedge. But what I've found with this is it's if you know somebody, whether it's big media, small media, or whatever, you recommending me will do better than me reaching out directly. That's how most of these interviews have happened word of mouth. In fact, all of them have happened word of mouth. I didn't reach out to these people. These people reached out to me through somebody else making the recommendation. It truly makes all of the difference in the world. I want to thank Dan O'Neill in particular, who's involved with the Libertarian Party of New Jersey, who just connected me with Ernest Hancock, who then introduced me to James Corbett. That was a game changer already just in the span of a week. So if you believe, in the mission and what I'm talking about, you want to, help me get this message amplified. I would say this, just if you can think of one person that you show or channel you think I should be on, please consider reaching out to that person and seeing if we can get this word out. Because again, we don't have a lot of time. I have a bunch of, different outlets here that I think would be good to reach out to, but I'm not going to go through all of that. Ultimately, obviously it would be useful to be at some point. I'd like to be on Joe Rogan talking about this, or on Tucker Carlson talking about this, because people do not know what's going on. I watched what's going on in Congress today. And they've passed these bills that are horrible for freedom in crypto, but because they have crypto in the name, people are sitting around saying, oh, crypto is going to be a major election issue. Crypto is going to determine the outcome of the election. It's like, you're just supporting something that handed more power to the banks. You just supported a bill that's going to make it easier to roll out CBDCs. And so it's, it's hard to break through the noise. And I even see it within the crypto community. People are patting themselves on the back. It's like, okay, I showed you the slide of all the people that are in jail, all the enforcement actions, the IRS, everybody coming after crypto, and people are celebrating as a win the fact that banks are going to be able to custody crypto. Like we're losing badly. And to me, the thing that we have left is the ability to develop better solutions. So with that said, I don't know why the screen, what happened to the screen? Hold on. So I guess I just end with, and all of this is on the daylightfreedom.org site, but the immediate call to action is I need help with a product manager, lead dev, and lead designer. Need help getting the message out, and help with the media, and I need help with the workshops, in particular, help with logistics and sponsorships on the ground. So I thank you for your time. Happy to take questions. There aren't that many questions in here. I will say I am disappointed that I seem to be shadow banned. I actually had a good run of luck on X, and then when this thing went live, it did not reach very many people. So unfortunately, I don't think we got as many participants as I would have liked. But this is recorded, and so I'll be able to distribute it after the fact. But if anybody has any questions, happy to answer. And then what I'll probably do is set up something else for next week, not this format, more of an interactive format. I don't know if it's going to be a Twitter space or something so that it's more interactive. I just wanted to get this one burst of information out there so that we've got a reference point moving forward. So are there any questions or comments at this point? All right. Well, thank you for your time, and I would appreciate it if you would like and share this. And again, go to my Twitter, join the DEFCON Twitter community, and then go to daylightfreedom.org. And hold on, there's a question here. Go to daylightfreedom.org and you can fill out those forms. That is going to be the best way for me to stay on top of the information, much more so than if you just message me, because I'm trying to manage a whole bunch of things that I don't want it to get lost. Somebody asked, I have a question. Since many wallets have been shut down before, how are you planning to be resilient against that? So the way to be resilient against it is we're going to fork an open source. It's going to be open source code. So there isn't going to be a corporate structure. It is literally just going to be code that is going to be available for public use. And the challenge with this is going to be how to set up a funding model, because I already know what the big issue then is moving forward is how do we make sure we can fund the maintenance of the wallet? Because when you're dealing with multiple cryptocurrencies, sometimes these cryptocurrencies change and upgrade functionality and so forth, and you actually have to keep up on those changes. And so we're going to need to come up with a funding structure. But I do believe that there are enough interested parties in terms of different cryptos and alternative assets. And then eventually, as this grows, merchants, that we're going to be able to provide funding for some kind of a crowd-funded maintenance vehicle. And in fact, interestingly, so AnyPay is one that we might fork. I mean, AnyPay was a good product. AnyPay was a product that had a lot of folks using it, but it wasn't open source, and some issues happened, and the people that were running the project could no longer run it anymore. And so prior to it being open source, it just meant that there were a lot of retailers that weren't able to get service. And so this is why decentralization and open source is absolutely critical, and avoiding the App Store. I mean, that's been an issue, and I could go through. I was trying to even count. I can't even count how many wallets I've used over the years, and how many wallets I've seen and tested and everything else. And yeah, most of them are actually gone. So this is why I think we have to take the approach that I'm proposing, or otherwise there's not going to be any stability. All right. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you, everybody. And if you would, please consider liking and sharing this. Like I said, it seems to be somewhat suppressed. So I'm hoping we can reach more people with this over the coming days and weeks. Thank you very much. Talk to you soon.